The world's richest guy is set to buy one of the world's most influential social media companies. After weeks of uncertainty, Elon Musk struck a deal to buy Twitter at a price of roughly $44 billion. But the question is, what's he going to do with it? Twitter as a company, as a stock, has massively underperformed. That is not a secret. Activists have tried to change it, but it is such a huge undertaking fraught with conflict and politics and craziness. Those who could raise the money to buy it don't want the responsibility or the headache. So what's it going to look like? And for that, let's welcome New York Times contributing writer and host of the Sway and Pivot podcast, my dear friend Kara Swisher, and NBC News tech correspondent Jake Ward, who has been covering disinformation and studies the effect of social media on human behavior. Kara, you are an Elon Musk expert. He might be the only person with the money, the brazenness, and the love of chaos to actually do this. But now here we are. What's it going to look like?
Well, the last two are critically important to this endeavor, as you know. This is really kind of a big swing for him, and he's doing something that a lot of people sort of wanted to do but couldn't because of the controversy or antitrust scrutiny or anything else. And he was probably one of the few in the position to pull off something like this. I don't know what it's going to look like. He talks about it being a free speech platform. I'm not sure what that means. He talks, he sort of insults advertising, as did Jack Dorsey in a very similar tweet, an interestingly similar tweet. He talks about it being a place where there's trust, where there's open algorithms. So it's a lot of words, and it's kind of a word salad. We'll see what it means in execution going forward, but actually we won't see, because you're not going to be able to see into this company anymore if it goes private.
Okay, but Jake, it's great to talk about these things in platitudes. Right now, Elon Musk has the privilege of being a heckler, posing as a free speech warrior. But what he's about to become is a massive content moderator on one of the biggest platforms. How does that, I mean, is that a job that he wants to do?
You know, it is not at all clear here, Stephanie, that, you know, his incredible popularity on Twitter, right, he has over 80 million followers, in any way qualifies him or prepares him to run the party, right? You just can't necessarily gain the experience you need being in charge of one of the world's top political and social interaction platforms just because you're really one of the loudest voices on it. I mean, you know, as Kara pointed out, there's really no telling what this thing is going to look like, especially because this guy has no experience whatsoever with any of the lines of business involved in Twitter. He has no media experience. He has no experience with advertising. Tesla doesn't even really advertise. And, you know, the idea that he's also now going to be essentially the referee of major political speech around the world, including possibly the decision of whether or not to bring Donald Trump back onto the platform, and in doing so, possibly, you know, supercharge a second presidential bid. I mean, all of that is definitely way outside what Elon Musk has ever done before now, even though he is, of course, so accomplished in all these other areas of industry.
Then given all that, Kara, that he might not like the daily grind of this job, the scrutiny it's going to put on his life, should we be thinking about when and if he doesn't like this, who could he end up selling it to?
Well, he could run it for a while and then take it public again. I mean, I think he's going to keep in the current CEO. Obviously, Jack Dorsey's involved. He tweeted a very unusual tweet about Radiohead and a song, and this is the way it should be. It sounds like he was planning with Elon in the way these tweets ran. I'm not even sure. I can't even tell. Obviously, Jeff Bezos weighed in with a sort of negative tweet. But, you know, I honestly think he's going to run it and then possibly take it public again in a different format, a different form with maybe a different business, maybe not advertising, maybe subscription, maybe a public square, maybe it'll become a utility, a public utility. Who knows?
I want to share that tweet by Twitter co-founder Jack Dorsey, where he writes, "In principle, I don't believe anyone should own or run Twitter. It wants to be a public good at a protocol level, not a company. Solving for the problem of it being a company, however." Here's the thing, though. I do love it when these bazillionaires talk about let's just do public good and no one should own it. Founding Twitter is what made Jack Dorsey the billionaire he is today. So that's kind of hard for me to stomach.
It might be. Yesterday, I woke up sucking on a lemon. I don't know if that's the Radiohead lyric that he quoted. I don't know what to say. I honestly, this is like, there's not a wackier group of people than these tech people, and they're moving around assets in a really unusual way. Elon is on the hook for a lot of money. Let's just keep that. You started in business, Stephanie, and you know what that means, these banks and these loans. And he's got to make good, or I don't know what. I honestly don't know what, actually.
Let's go to that, the what. Like, this thing isn't a done deal. Jake, talk to us about the hurdles he still needs to go through, right? We're months away. People are going, oh, my God, Trump's going to be on Twitter tomorrow. No. This thing is not a done deal.
No, that's right. It has to go through certainly the regulatory hurdles, but there's no indication that anyone at the federal level is going to get in the way because he's not buying a competitor. There's almost no antitrust issues here, so that's probably going to go forward. You know, the truth of the matter is he does have the money. He has at least put up a huge amount of basically his ownership of Tesla as collateral. If Tesla were to somehow tank as a company and the stock were to go down, he'd suddenly have to repay that debt really quick. But right now, Tesla's doing great. And so he does seem to have the firepower to make this thing happen. But he's going to run into all kinds of crazy problems. I mean, right, the election is one thing, but think about this. I mean, Stephanie, the European Union just passed one of the most sweeping regulatory changes in the history of the Internet, the Digital Services Act, which is going to make platforms like Twitter financially and legally responsible for hate speech if it goes up on there. You know, this at a time when this guy is buying this stuff after having talked at the TED conference about wanting to basically open this thing up, make it much more of a free speech platform. He was asked if there's sort of something that's in the gray area, what's your attitude about that? He says, well, if a tweet's in the gray area, I should leave it up. You've got that guy suddenly in charge at a time when everybody's thinking about how these platforms need to be better controlled and moderated, how to be better studied, and still he's going to make it private. You know, there's no indication that he's going to go along with any of that. So just as Kara says, it's such a weird piece of news.
Yeah.
This guy is such a strange person to be taking over something like this. It's a very, very surreal day for all of us who watch this stuff.
And what is gray area to the colorblind? Kara, last question to you. Is it a foregone conclusion that Trump's going to be back on Twitter?
I think if he wanted to be, I think Elon was against the ban at the time, so I would assume he continues to be that way. Trump is over messing around with Rumble and some sad little merger over there, and they're trying to like revive Trump's Truth Social and SPAC and this and that. And he said he wasn't. I don't think he can resist. Honestly, I can't. If he runs, he's going to be on Twitter. I just don't see. He just can't resist. He just can't quit it. Like, let's just say it that way.